Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
So, Brooke, how many Black friends do you have? Count them on. I'm just kidding.
At least 4.
At least 4.
I say, don't do that to Brooke. Don't do it like that.
Well, I was going to ask you the opposite question. No, but I'm not through with Brooke yet. Tell me, is your community predominantly white?
My friend community?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Okay. You already mentioned that from a diversity perspective, there are a lot of Asians in your interactions, et cetera. And so I asked the question starkly that way on purpose, because I just wanted to know what your background was, and with no intent of judgment at all. I'm going to release you from my grip right now and then ask the same thing of Nicole. Nicole, how about your community? Is your community predominantly Black, especially now that you moved to Lafayette, Louisiana?
Oh, so most of my adult life has been in California.
Yes.
So most of my friends are very diverse.
Okay.
I have friends from all walks of life, all religions. And I think a lot of that has to do with being in California. Even going to Louisiana, funny enough, my one friend that I have is actually an older white woman at the moment. So, I'm across the board.
So I want to tell a story about Brooke. I think it was in high school. Brooke, with a group of friends, went to visit New York City by herself. And they stayed with my dad in Manhattan. And was it 6 of you, I believe, that went?
Something like that.
One morning, my dad's downstairs and Brooke and her friends come downstairs and they're having breakfast together. Later, I talked to my dad. I said, how's everything going with Brooke? Is she exhausting you yet? He said, man, I felt like I was having breakfast at the United Nations because of the diversity of Brooke's friends. They included white, Black, Asian, Filipino, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were about 6 different ethnic diversities within that environment. And I think my dad, looking at, who would have been at my dinner table, would have seen or breakfast table, would have seen a much wider breakfast grouping than he saw with Brooke in Manhattan. Do you remember that story, Brooke?
Yeah, I do. I think he ended up telling us the same thing. My group of friends from high school, there's one mixed Black girl, one Brazilian Chinese, French Filipino, and a Middle Eastern Jewish white Caucasian mixed girl. So yeah, we got have a little mix of everything going on. And yeah, we definitely have had some interesting conversations between us. Irvine, from where I grew up, was diverse in the sense, as I explained, very diverse in the Asian populations. I went to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, one of the least diverse schools in California, probably. And then moving to Oregon, another very not diverse area. And then being in the vet school, which is a very notoriously white profession as well. I think my school has done a pretty good job in the grand scheme of vet schools of admitting a pretty diverse class. I don't know how it compares to Western. I haven't looked at the demographics. So I have been fortunate to make some friends of different racial and ethnic backgrounds here as well. I think that's just, what I've gotten comfortable with. It's always a comment that people don't understand that I say. When I moved to Cal Poly, when I moved to San Luis Obispo, and moving into a very predominantly white population, I was honestly scared. I was not used to that. I guess white culture was different to me because although I'm racially white, ethnically I am Jewish. So yeah, it was a big change.
But you've also been a minority everywhere you go from a Jewish standpoint, haven't you?
Yes.
So let me ask you, do people know you're Jewish when you walk in the room?
Probably not, having blue eyes and blonde hair.
And so have you personally experienced any negative or positive interactions or experiences because of your Jewish heritage?
I guess I'm fortunate that I don't think I have experienced any anti-Semitism. I mean, I've definitely heard of events happening where I was living at the time, whether it was Orange County, SLO here, seen a lot of swastikas around Corvallis, kind of interesting, but nothing ever personally to me. I feel like I've had a very opposite experience. I feel like I've met a lot of people who either grew up really religious and don't want to be religious anymore, or people who grew up without religion in their life and been told like Judaism is the religion I most respect. The ideals, the culture. I don't know. I've heard a lot of people speak good things about it. So I think I've had a lucky experience being Jewish, I guess.
How do you feel when you see a swastika around Corvallis?
I just don't get it. I mean, of course, I'm disgusted. I don't want to see that, and it's very disrespectful. I don't get it. I don't get what makes someone want to draw it, believe in Judaism as a religion to like hate. I don't know. I just don't get it.
I like that. I don't get it. How does one get to the point where they actually embrace a symbol of hatred?
Yeah.
Do you see swastikas as anti-Semitic only?
No, I know it encompasses a lot more than just anti-Semitism. I just know that's the most, I guess, taught or like prominent symbol.
Well, because of the Holocaust, I understand why it becomes the most prominent interpretation. And it would be perfectly understandable why someone would see it as an anti-Semitic symbol. I don't necessarily see it as an anti-Black symbol, even though I understand that there was a superior race that the swastika was supposed to represent, and all other races were condemned by the swastika. But no other race had to deal with concentration camp. No other in Germany. No other race in Germany was the subject of formal extermination of the way the Jewish race was. So there's plenty of circumstance that and happenstance in history that supports that. Nicole, how about you? What is your most poignant experience of discrimination?
You know what? This is kind of a funny, touchy, and scary subject for me, honestly, because listening to you guys' podcast, especially with The Talk, where you guys actually mentioned that you had a discussion with your sons about racism in terms of being pulled over by the cops. I never really had that discussion with you. And the funny thing was, I didn't even really know that was a thing. So here I am dating Black men. And I probably didn't even really hear about it until, of course, later on, I heard from Brian and Vincent, who were my brothers. But I heard from a guy that I was dating at the time that when he gets pulled over, he has to step out of his car every time and allow the police to search it. And I was like, that can't be real. Here I am in this sense of disillusionment myself, and I have 2 Black males in my household, and I'm not even knowing that this really was even a thing. And I kind of feel bad even for my own ignorance. However, there was one time here in California where I had stepped out to go meet a friend, and I was driving in my car. And at the time, they had just changed the law where you couldn't talk on your cell phone while you were driving. And so I was like, I don't want to get pulled over by a cop. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull over into a nearby neighborhood, which is only a couple of blocks from my house. And I'm going to take this phone call in the neighborhood. Well, I'm in the car for I'll say about 10 minutes. And while I'm sitting there, I see 2 flashing cops just race past me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where are they going? Come to find out, they're coming for me. So apparently someone had called the cops and stated that there was a Black woman sitting in her car. And I'm like, so where was the crime? That was my first taste of where is the crime in this? Like 2 cop cars with flashing lights, like I was the one that had just robbed a house. And he asked me for my license and registration and asked me what I was doing there. And after I told him, he looked at the other cop and he was kind of like, why? Like, okay. But they sat there until I felt so uncomfortable being there that I pulled off.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that's the worst thing that ever happened to you as your father. But at the same time, I must say that your not knowing about the talk is a reflection of the gender effect
Yes.
in the South.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the fact that I was raised with a male-centric perspective,
Mm-hmm.
there was a difference in the way the police handled Black men and Black women.
Black women, yes.
And so that's one of the reasons there was a difference.
Oh, for sure.
But I should have recognized that you were Black first and prepared you for dealing with the police just as a Black person. The talk may have been a little different,
mm-hmm.
But Black men are seen as aggressors and threats a lot more easily than Black women. Therefore, they're treated differently. Hearing you go through that pointed out even my evolution as a male, my evolution of the relationship between males and females. Because I was, when I was raised, my dad wouldn't even let me iron my clothes because that was his wife's job. I didn't get a chance to iron clothes until I joined the Boy Scouts. And then I had to take care of my own uniform, my Boy Scout uniform. And that was the exception for me for a while. Your mother taught me differently, however. Once we got married, I realized it was a true partnership. Once again, I'm enjoying this discussion because I'm learning perspectives I never knew too.
So I want to ask Brooke something. Before listening to the podcast, or maybe even before this current conversation, have you heard of the quote unquote talk as it relates to Black families?
I think so. I guess I don't remember the timeline of events kind of thing. I know from my friends that being pulled over by a cop is a lot more serious. They're all females, or I guess the two at the time were females. So still different, but I mean, one of my friends got pulled over for pretty sure not renewed license plates. And so when the cop pulled her over and asked her for her license and registration, she stuck her hand in her purse to get it, and the cop pulled a gun on her. So I knew a little bit about it. And then also from the TV show All American that I watch, they talked about it on there. And I can't remember if I saw that episode before or after your podcast episode. So I think I heard about it before the podcast. But if I did, it was maybe within a year of each other.
Now, you've been pulled over for speeding, if I'm not incorrect.
Yes.
Besides worrying about how I was going to react, and even more worrying about how your mother was going to react, probably you were less concerned about the police officer than you were about me or your mother, weren't
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah, that part.
So it is an interesting change from that standpoint. You're worried about how your parents are going to be, and that the police officer is doing his job, but you didn't have the concern about reaching into your purse to get your driver's license. Especially
when the police officer asks you for the driver's license, and where do they think you're going to get it from? And then suddenly to react that way but part of that is a trained response too. It's a subtle racial profiling. It's an understandable reaction based on the cop's experience, but at the same time, it is why Blacks are shot more often.
Phil, you were talking about swastikas and hate. There's this concept of hating people you maybe even have never met before, or having distaste for people you've never met before. And Brooke, a number of years ago, you wrote a very poignant, I believe it was a Facebook post, about an experience you had when you were walking Jack, and this dog owner. Can you relate that story a little bit?
Yeah. So I was walking my dog at the time, and he was off leash and went up to this other woman's dog who was he was like, they're both like some type of German Shepherd mixes, and ended up some discussion about, oh yeah, oh, same dog breeds, they like hanging around each other, just like, like, or this is what the other lady was saying. She was like, oh, like just like, I'm a white woman, like you won't see me walking around in like a Latino neighborhood, like I like to be with, like my white community. Like something along those lines. I have it written down if you ever want to read it, but I was just standing there like, that's not how it works. Like, I didn't say that out loud. I was in like so much shock. I don't think I said anything like at all. I think I just kept walking with like my eyes like wide open. But yeah, I mean, I guess basically moral of that story was another white female comes up to me as another white female, expects me to have the same biases as she does. And that's just not the case. That was start of COVID, Black Lives Matters protests going on in that whole time. And I was just like, you have learned nothing.
Oh, okay. That puts things in perspective.
When I read that on Facebook, I believe it was Facebook, it was like, that's my girl.
So Nicole, we talked about swastika and Corvallis, et cetera. How do you view the Confederate flag?
I think it goes in a conversation we did before, which is, to me, is all about intent. So I understand that the Confederate flag has a history behind it. I do believe that it should stay as a historical flag, but I don't like it when it's being used as a flag to showcase hate. Honestly, that's really all I feel about it. Because I didn't really see, it wasn't until the Trump era, really, that you saw people hanging flags so abruptly. I never ran across anybody like, oh, I'm really into the Confederacy outside of like a historian standpoint. So I don't really have any like hard feelings towards it. It's just, for me, it is really all about the intent behind it.
So when we lived in the South, North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, you didn't notice the Confederate flags that were being hung out in front of houses or in the back of pickup trucks. That didn't faze you at all.
As a child, no, it didn't. To be fair with you, I didn't really understand the history of it until I got older, until we even started having some of these conversations ourselves, really, again, until the Trump era. I don't want to say that you guys did a great job of sheltering us from racism and that type of hatred, but to be fair, you did a great job of sheltering us from that type of hatred. I don't even recall anybody in my circle, even living in the South, being, I hate Black people.
You brought up the Trump era, so it opens up Pandora's box. I mean, I remember, we won't spend a lot of time there, but I remember Brooke and Brianna growing up and getting their driver's licenses and getting their voters registration and everything else. And it's like, why bother to vote? What impact can it have? What's the big deal? I don't even know who we're voting for or against. And I think as we moved into that era of post-Obama and to an era of much greater consternation and challenges and issues, it became, even at that point in time, as you mentioned, Nicole, it became more front and center. And I think I remember on election night of 2016, Brianna texted me, and I think she was still in Santa Monica at that point in time. No, I know she was. Couldn't get over the election results. Brooke and Brianna both started to get much more politically aware in the era since 2016 because of this disruption. I'm not saying that things were going around smoothly, but I think a lot of evil came out that had been somewhat tamped down for a period of time. And I think that was shown with the Black Lives Matter and the response that Brooke had. And I think it's been shown in the voting aspect of things, with my kids much more focused on making sure that their vote is being heard. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Brooke, but I think until things changed in the Trump era, for lack of a better way, you became much more politically aware as the world around you started getting rocked.
Kind of had to.
Yeah.
You kind of had to, though, didn't you? And,
Yeah, that's great.
Politically ADD, that you actually had to be involved or you'd miss something. Nicole, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no. I was just agreeing. I think he definitely stirred a hornet's nest. However, to some degree, as bad as those years were, I'm actually kind of thankful for them, because so many people were so asleep, myself included, including a lot of my friends around me who, nobody wanted to talk about politics. Of course, everyone was tired of politics, talking about politics under that era. But what I've noticed is no one's as asleep as they were. They were at least trying to go out to gain that knowledge and to have talking points against or for, why they believed one way or the other, which before no one wanted even to talk about it at all. So.
Yeah. And for me, like, as me being Jewish and my friends of ethnic backgrounds, like, everyone was being threatened. My friend whose parents were from Mexico, she was like, I don't know if I could stay in the United States. At that point, you're kind of like, well, I kind of have to figure out what's going on, because I don't know if my friends are going to be okay. I don't know if I'm going to be okay.
And then you also understand, like, the underbelly. You see all the things that have been worrisome and problemsome for everyone. Yeah, I think it was an eye-opening experience. Even my daughter, my 18-year-old daughter and my youngest daughter, who's only 11, they became wanting to be activists as well. So it stirred up something.
Well, we just hope that it stirred up the desire to learn before action,
Right.
rather than reaction. Because that can be just as devastating. The good news is that things seem to have settled down, regardless of what you think of Biden. You don't have to pay attention every day. You can get on with your life. Unfortunately, though, people seem to be falling asleep again.
Well, I think you said something to Peter about, in one podcast, where Peter goes, he's afraid that things are dying down. And you said, well, at some point it has to. No one can keep this up at this level all the time. So I think maybe what you're seeing is it feels like it's dying down, but we're doing more work behind the scenes.
I hope so, but we just had an election here in California, and apparently we had the lowest participation in this election in history. And
that is scary.
Yeah, it's very scary.
2 years ago, Phil, when you and I started having these conversations, part of my frustration was that I felt like we had gone back to the 1960s, and because our conversation started shortly after George Floyd, and that nothing has changed. And you have to keep reminding me that things have changed, and that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And if we try to run this as a sprint, we do get exhausted. So I think some of this up and down has to do with, you need to take a break between sprints to be able to get through and to whatever the end may be. I think they keep pushing the finish line further and further out, but the fact is, you just got to keep moving, keep moving, or Dory, keep swimming. And I think that's, sometimes you swim faster, sometimes you swim slower, but you never want to stop swimming. And that's a take home that I've gotten from you, which is slow down, we'll get there, just keep moving forward. And we are changing, because I think I just get frustrated by the fact that I see Uvalde, I see Buffalo, and it's like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But there have been changes that you've experienced in the last 50 to 60 years, and probably to a lesser degree that Nicole has experienced, that do indicate some positive changes. But God, every time I see one of these shootings, every time I see some of the statements that come out by the far off the wall groups, like I'm watching in the January 6th from the Proud Boys and the other group that's there, Oath Keepers, it's like, OMG, are we going back to the 60s again? So you have to keep me on the straight and narrow there, Phil.
I've been wrong before.
Mm-hmm.
And I do appreciate the fact that you heard me, but I learned from you as well. And although patience is a virtue, impatience is motivation. I think you said it best. As long as we're moving forward, I hate statements of absolutism. And when you say that things haven't changed from the 60s, well, I remember in the 60s following my father to register to vote and watching him take a test and then be denied the right to vote because after he passed the test, they pulled a jar of marbles out and said, tell me how many marbles are in this jar. We don't have to do that anymore. They don't get to use their discretion to determine who's going to pass the marble test. That is a change that I lived through, that I cannot deny. However, I kind of fell asleep too, in that I thought some of these changes that we've made were permanent, set in stone, cemented in the foundation. And yet I'm sitting here watching Texas and Georgia try to turn the clock back. When I see that, I get just as frenetic as you when it comes to getting frustrated about the passivity that people respond to that about. So the two of us may come up with the right tenor. You do have to rest a little bit, but resting, like as you said, just maybe treading water for a bit before you keep going. But we can't stop moving because there are people who actually remember when everybody knew their place, to quote Reagan, and they want to reinvent that environment where everybody knew their place. And that's the environment that, as long as I'm living, I'm going to happily fight and throw my body across the track to keep that from happening. I'm just amazed at the audacity of unfairness that's being promoted. And that goes from not allowing a woman to make a decision about her own health, to taking away voting rights from a segment of the electorate based on the big lie. Those things are unconscionable to me. And I can make those statements without any guilt because I haven't even touched on the issue of abortion yet. This is about an individual's right to control their own body and their health. We will allow individuals to determine whether or not they're going to kill themselves with alcohol or kill themselves with tobacco. Hell, we'll even regulate, but all of a sudden we have to come into, we have to control some other aspect. So I think we temper each other. And I just want to make sure you understand, I learned as much from you as you do from me, my friend.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.